Welcome. It's so great to see you.
Oh, what a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
I honestly did some background research on you, and I honestly had never heard of you before until the book came out. So I was
Sure.
like, really? I've never. And then I went through your website, and I'm like, oh my God, why didn't I see these theatrics, these incredible articles before? They're amazing. So thank you
Oh,
for
thank you.
coming.
I appreciate you taking a deep dive.
That's wonderful, and I'm so grateful you're here. So everyone, I am Becky B, the Book Dragon, and I have with me one of the great theatrical writers of the century, and of course the author of Lin-Manuel Miranda, The Education of an Artist and we have our guest today, Daniel Pollack-Pelzner. So welcome aboard, and I cannot wait to get started. So did you get a chance to go over the questionnaire that I sent you?
Yes, I shared it with my daughter and her friend last night as we were driving in the carpool, and we all did it together, and it was so much fun.
Oh, that's cool. Awesome. All right, so I'm going to go through the questions one by one and just give your feedback. I may stop because depending on like the book titles that you mention, maybe there'll be books that I have read and I might want to give my share on that, and then I will get
Great.
to my questions on the book.
Oh, great.
Awesome.
Terrific.
All right, so based on number one, what are the top 10 books that have influenced your life and in your profession, whether it be a personal narrative or stories that have left a lasting impression on you and why? And whatever you can elaborate, I'm all ears.
Wonderful. Well, what a fun invitation. I ended up thinking of this less as a kind of, you know, 10 best books and more as like 10 books that have transformed me at different points in my life. Going back to childhood, my first book that I would put on the list is The Wizard of Oz by L. Frank Baum. This is the first book that created a world that I wanted to enter when I was a kid. And I was obsessed with this book. My grandparents had given me a beautifully illustrated edition that I read over and over. And then I wanted to read all the other books in the Oz sequence. And apparently, I don't really remember this, but I guess when I was 4, I was so entranced by Oz that I would only answer to the name Dorothy. And I would dress up as Dorothy, and I had little like masks that I would wear. I
Oh my God.
recently ran into like a preschool gymnastics teacher at the grocery store, and she said, "Hi, Daniel." She said, "Is it okay if I call you Daniel, or will you still only answer to Dorothy?" So that is, I mean, that's sort of for an author, what a dream level of identification that a little
Yeah.
kid who reads the book wants to become the protagonist. And I've learned since that there are many, many people who wanted to become Dorothy and imagined that as their pathway too, but that was certainly a gateway for me. And then we would watch the film version of The Wizard of Oz every year when it
Mm,
was broadcast, right, in the 80s on television. And my family didn't have a color TV when I was growing up. And so Oz and Kansas looked pretty similar. But then one year, my parents came home with this new contraption in a box, color television. And it just happened to be the night that The Wizard of Oz was broadcast. And I remember we plugged it in, and Dorothy stepped out of her Kansas home, plunged by the tornado into new magical land, and I
right.
was in Technicolor heaven. It was magic unfolding in front of my eyes. Number two, 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. So this, I would say, was the mind-blowing book of my high school years. Was, oh my God, I did not know that you could write literature like this. My friends and I would just go around quoting the first sentence of the novel to each other. Many years later, when he faced the firing squad, Colonel Aureliano Buendia was to remember that distant, ooh, is it morning or afternoon, when his father took him to discover ice. Some of your listeners will correct me and modify my translation, but it was like, what is this combination of violence, the firing squad, and discovery, finding ice? What is this verb tense, was to remember? Is this like a foretold world, a prophesied world, or a historical world? And
Hmm.
what are all of the magical things that are unfolding in Garcia Marquez's vision of a Latin American, a Colombian origin story of magical flights of butterflies and girls ascending to the heavens and prehistoric eggs surrounding people whose curses are passed through the generations. It was sort of a vision of Latin American history, of magical realism, of a combination of gritty political reality and fantasy that I had never encountered before and that
Mm.
thrilled me on every level.
I read a few of Marquez's short stories. I want to say it's called The Ghost of August. I
Mm.
think, but I have not. This is one book of his that I have yet to read is 100 Years of Solitude. Let's keep going. Awesome.
All right, next up, To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf.
Oh,
This was the book that made me fall in love with the sentence as a tool of literary writing. And I remember this is also late high school into college. I think it was an assignment to look closely at a particular passage from Woolf's novel, which is in part about a dinner party, her memory of her parents and a one perfect evening, and then about time passing, and then about an artist trying to recreate this perfect moment and what art can do in both painting art and literary art to try to preserve or capture these moments that seem so exquisite and so fleeting and so evanescent. And I remember like staying up. I was a pretty early to bed guy as an adolescent, and I just stayed up till all hours, just enraptured by a set of sentences that was describing I think the beam of the lighthouse coming into the private study, if I'm remembering it right. And it was this kind of rhythm and motion of the prose that was ascending to an almost like ecstatic level. And I remember feeling like I was lost in a blissful way, that I was almost outside of my own body, reading Woolf's language about connecting with something that was bigger than yourself and feeling a part of the sort of pulsing rhythms of the lighthouse that then became the rhythms of the sentences that then became this novel that could capture both of them. And it was a kind of stylistic and almost kind of corporeal thrill that I'd never experienced before in writing, but I chase ever since. Okay, then Atonement by Ian McEwan.
oh wow.
So, a knockout novel, and I think it came out when I read it. So this is after college. My high school girlfriend, who's now my wife, and I were living together in Paris, teaching at the American school there. And
Oh,
we'd been high
wow.
school sweethearts. We were long distance in college, and this was the first time that we were actually able to be in the same place together. And
Yeah.
we were both reading Atonement, this Ian McEwan novel that had just come out, that was like thrillingly suspenseful and twisty about a girl who does something horrible in the run up to World War II in England, and the consequences of her actions have then ripple effects for everybody who's involved in her world. And it's both a kind of coming of age story of a young writer, and it's a kind of ethical reckoning of the world before World War II and what kind of lies it perpetuated that allowed this horror to unfold. And my memory is we had one hardcover copy of this book between me and Laura, and we were just passing it back and forth because we both were so eager to find out what the next twist was going to be and what was going to happen at the end. It was like a masterclass on psychology and fiction, but also the ethics of fiction, what the artist's responsibility is to the world that they're creating, and what the consequences are of making things up. Was fascinating to think about, and it felt like it was the sort of it's a love story, and it was a love story that my soon-to-be wife and I were passing back and forth between each other. So we always think back on Atonement with great fondness for this time of our life in France together.
Did it surprise you at the end?
Oh my God. Yes. I feel like I don't know if I can discuss it, but maybe 20 years later, it's no longer a spoiler. Gobsmacked. Yes. Yes. You
Or
and your,
gobsmacked?
your
Yes,
readers will know.
exactly. Was not expecting
Uh,
that.
yes. And I remember teaching the novel, and students would thrill to it every time as well. Okay. Number five, Our Mutual Friend by Charles Dickens. So now we're getting into graduate school. And I did my doctorate in English literature and became an English professor. And Our Mutual Friend is one of those Victorian door stoppers. It's a, I don't know, 900 page or so tome of Victorian literature. And I remember I had been given a copy by my father when I was 13 years old. I had, for my bar mitzvah, I think I got three copies of Great Expectations, also by Charles Dickens. I think because its title sort of signifies like you're coming into adulthood, and it seemed like for a bookish kid, it would be an appropriate rite of passage.
Yeah.
And I wonder how many of the people who gave it to me had read it, because it's all about your hopes being dashed and your pretensions of who you're going to become exposed, and your complicity in the world revealed. But I really liked reading it. And so my dad, who had started an English graduate program and then dropped out to become an artist, which is his wonderful career, said, "Oh, if you liked Great Expectations, you should try Our Mutual Friend." At 13, I had zero interest in this 900-page novel that seemed totally murky and opaque to me. But then when I returned to it, actually on my honeymoon, my wife and I returned to France just after we got married. This was 2004, and I needed a big book to sustain me through a couple of weeks. And by a pool in Provence, I started reading it, and I was totally entranced. And it was both like all of the sentence level play and thrill that I had loved in works like Virginia Woolf or Garcia Marquez, and it was also the kind of social conscience and reckoning with the decay and rot and corruption in a society that Garcia Marquez and McEwan had started to attune me to. And I felt like, oh wow, the Victorian novel, the big loose baggy monster of 19th century literature, could be the form through which I could both be excited about the possibilities of art and reckon with the social problems of our era, refracted through an earlier era. And I got obsessed with the novel and all of its myriad web of characters, the way you would if you watch, a complicated season of The Wire or Lost or some multi-pronged TV show, serialized over time. And I ended up writing my first articles about Our Mutual Friend, giving lectures about it. And my wife and I still speak to each other in phrases from the novel, because Dickens is so good at characterization in ways that help you remember people through their characteristic phrases. So that's sort of the touchstone of my graduate school days.
Oh, I had a question. Since you were in Paris, and because
Ooh.
you have, all this theatrical history, and that you are also a big writer of Shakespeare, did you get a chance to go to Shakespeare and Company?
I love Shakespeare and Company. Yes, that would be our go-to, a walk on a Sunday down by the Seine, and then we would end up at Shakespeare and Company, find a wonderful used book. There was, what was it, Walt Whitman's grandson or something was apparently living upstairs at the time, and there
Oh,
all this history around it.
yeah, that's right. They allow, what is it? They allow like poor writers, or like students of writing to, I don't know, what is it, like work. If you work at the bookstore, they let you live there rent free or something. I don't know. One of my favorite writers, Sark, had talked about her time actually living at the Shakespeare and Company bookstore, but I'm not quite sure that's the same thing.
Well, I think you're right. I think that was the beautiful thing about it, was that it was both a wonderful bookstore, and it seemed like it was sustaining a community of writers and readers. I remember going to readings there and going to book parties there. So thank you for reminding me of that. That was and of course had this fabled connection to James Joyce's Ulysses, right? As the place that helped to bring it into the world. And my mom had written her thesis on Ulysses in college, and I had become sort of obsessed with early James Joyce, and so it felt like it had this literary history as well as this vitality in the present. So a
Wait, hold
wonderful
on.
spot.
He wrote Ulysses while he was there,
I
or
don't, I don't think he wrote it there, but I believe, well, so we'll have to fact check this, but there's some role that Shakespeare and Company played in helping to publish or helping to distribute Ulysses. Um, So it was connected somehow with the origin of the novel.
because I know the one copy that my father has a copy of it. Apparently, Ulysses, I believe, was banned in
That's
America at
right.
a time, and that in the book it actually has the actual ruling.
Yes,
the judgment that allowed it to be unbanned, I think permanently, I guess.
right. Yeah, that obscenity trial.
Mhm.
Exactly. Yeah, isn't that a fascinating thing to have in the book as well? So I don't know how that would have affected the French publication. We can dive into this, but it was somehow bound up with this story of
Yeah.
like forbidden literature and transgressive and experimental literature and
Right.
expatriate writers. And here we were, Americans living in Paris as, Joyce was always writing and living abroad. So it allows us at least to sustain our fantasy that we were connected with this wonderful cosmopolitan expat world of European literary history.
All right. Let's keep going.
Okay, number six, The Code of the Woosters by P.G. Wodehouse, who is my favorite comic writer, the supreme British comic novelist. And he writes these short stories about a kind of bumbling, aristocratic doofus, Bertie Wooster, in 1920s or 30s in London, and his kind of omniscient and inflappable manservant Jeeves. And Bertie's always getting into scrapes, usually involving an unwanted marriage plot, and extricates him from these these scrapes. And they were adapted to a wonderful TV series with Hugh Laurie and Stephen Fry as Bertie and Jeeves. And my dad introduced me to them, and I cannot overstate how much pleasure P.G. Wodehouse, and in particular The Code of the Whisters, has given me over the years. And I loved reading them, and I loved them also on audiobook. There was a wonderful British actor, so Jonathan Cecil, who would read them on audiobook. And this was in the early iPod days. I would just upload like CDs of these audiobooks to my iPod and just play them on shuffle. I'd be listening to music, and then all of a sudden a chapter of P.G. Wodehouse would pop up, and I knew all the books, and so it didn't really matter which one it was. I could just be plunked right into Joy in the Morning, or Right Ho Jeeves, or Stiff Upper Lip Jeeves, or Code of the Whisters, which is the most perfectly plotted of them. And it's sort of a country house farce that revolves around a silver cow creamer that gets pinched, and a policeman's helmet, and just sort of ridiculous aristocratic hijinks. But what distinguishes them is the rhythm of the sentences. And P.G. Wodehouse is sort of the famed master of the unexpected simile, the ridiculous kind of literary allusion that jostles up against street slang, or the kind of new coinage. The famous line, I think, at the beginning of the Code of the Whisters is like, I was, while not quite feeling disgruntled, I was far from feeling gruntled. And I never that gruntled could be its own word separate from disgruntled. So whenever I try to write something that has a little bounce to it, or that has a rhythm to the sentence, or that like just gives a reader delight through the kind of dance steps that syntax can go through, the Code of the Whisters.
And I was just going to say the way that you were describing it, I have not read it. It's one of my it's on my TBR list. But Dickens's The Pickwick Papers. That's what the way you were describing the characters reminds me
Yes.
very much of how Dickens would portray all four of the Pickwickians.
Yes,
Drawing a
absolutely,
blank right now.
absolutely in the Pickwick lineage for sure, and the sort of clever serving character Sam Weller in the Pickwick Papers, who's always savvier than Mr. Pickwick, who's getting into these scrapes and romantic entanglements and judicial imbroglios, is a kind of yes, precursor in a different vein, and Sam Wellerisms, and he would always sort of construct these crazy Cockney aphorisms. I think maybe in
Yeah.
that vein. Yeah, so you get the spirit of it for sure.
Okay.
Okay, then number seven, 100 Essays I Don't Have Time to Write by Sarah Rule. Sarah Rule is a phenomenal playwright. Dead Man's Cell Phone, Eurydice, In the Next Room, Passion Play. And she wrote this collection of essays, 100 Essays I Don't Have Time to Write, because she had just had twins and she thought she would never have time to write again. And her wonderful playwriting mentor, Paula Vogel, said, just write what you can in between feedings and
Right.
naps, daycare. And there's one of the essays has the number seven right in the middle of it because one of her kids was sitting on her lap and just typed seven while she was at the keyboard, and it stayed in. And I had just had my wife and I had our first children too, and I was thinking about relationship between writing and work life. And these essays are like a page long or 2 pages long. And so they seemed both a type of writing that you could do while you have a lot of other responsibilities in your life, whether it's child caring or work or elder care or other obligations. And they're also units that you can read while you're hastening from one thing to another. I just keep the book on my
Right.
bedside. Whenever I have a few minutes, I read them. And they're essays about the craft and practice of theater. And what is amazing to me is that they're all essays that start with something very mundane, like using umbrellas on stage, or snow in the theater, or intermissions, or cell phones. And they start with this sort of like very ordinary kind of problem. And within a page, within maybe two paragraphs or so, Sarah Ruhl has taken that ordinary prompt and turned it into something revelatory, something like deeply spiritual and transcendent. And it would turn out that snow on stage, which you would think is just a problem of like, do you use confetti or do you use, I don't know, cloud bunnies or who sweeps it up?
Right.
It's like the connection between the heavens and the earth in material form. And so much of my grad school training, I would say, had been in the mode of disenchantment. That what we were learning to do as literary scholars was to expose the ideologies that structured our narratives in the world. And we were going to reveal what kind of classist or racist or sexist assumptions upheld those ideologies, which I think is really important critical work to do and remains an urgent form of criticism, is to say we take this account of the world as natural, but let's look at who this account helps, who it inhibits, and who it gives power to, and who it disenfranchises. Like that's a really important type of critical move. But it was always in the mode of you thought you liked this thing, you thought you were moved and transported by it, but actually let me reveal why you shouldn't be susceptible to its illusions because it's doing something pernicious. And Sarah Ruhl, while being a deeply ethical writer who was really concerned about problems of gender and power and exclusion within the theater, was also an enchanting writer. And she believed that there were ways that you could conjure a sense of magic and a sense of transcendence through writing and through art that wouldn't be mystifying in the kind of older exploitative or abusive way, but could harness the powers of theater for good, and could practice a kind of ethics of care, which she was always really attuned to. I think not just as a parent, as an artist, but of how do we care for each other within a community. And so I felt like she was giving me both like a lesson in what the magical power of theater could be, and also a kind of ethics or a kind of way of practicing art, right as I was starting to teach and starting to engage with theater companies in Portland. That has remained a go-to source for me.
That's interesting how you say that she discusses on like even the most mundane ways on how to conjure up magic for theater. That the way that
Hmm.
you were describing it reminded me very much. Have you seen the musical version of Beauty and the Beast?
Yeah, right.
Okay. It's at the very beginning, and I have the book on the making of the musical and how they were trying to figure out, well, we want to bridge in, the whole stained glass window thing was genius for that
Hmm.
for that film at the beginning, but then how do we bridge in the Empress, and how they did that was that they combined the old hag, and the moment she took her robe off, you saw not only was she the enchantress, but she was the stained glass window. She had all of these different colors that became the highlights of the story later on in the production. So I thought that was just the way that you were describing it reminded me so much of what they took from just a simple idea to that. It was incredible.
I
So
love that you're making that connection. Yes, for sure. And that's, I think, definitely part of the aesthetic that I've learned from Sarah Ruhl. She'll have these impossible to perform stage directions in her play. She'll say, like, a character is so overcome with grief that she turns into an almond. And you think, like, how could you do that on stage, right? That's something you could do with film animation or CGI, but how can you turn into an almond or another character? It's often about ways of representing grief. A character builds a house out of string. We think like, is this like what could that be? And her goal is not to make theater spend millions of dollars on special effects, but rather to say, what can you do that enlists the audience's imagination as an active participant in the act of creation, the way that kids do. This is the other thing I was thinking of with Beauty and the Beast is like you've got all these natural, ordinary objects like the teapot and the clock and the candelabra that turn out to be infused with the spirit of the people who are within them. The way that when my kids
Right.
put on shows, they're just like, okay, this is like they grab a cardboard box and like this is Dorothy's house, and they grab a broomstick and like this is going to be the witch. And one of Sarah Ruhl's goals is sort of get back to that sense of childhood play and the sense of like we're going to just put on a show together using the stuff that we have. And because we believe in it together, we can invest it with the magic that will make it transformative.
Boy, that would be like taking Franz Kafka's Metamorphosis, where the guy suddenly finds himself as a cockroach. And imagine trying to put
Yeah.
that. Has that ever
Right.
been done?
Yes, exactly. Right. What is that? Like, it's such a striking metaphor. What is that? How would you do it? And what
I
would
mean,
that tell you about whatever it is, alienation in the modern world, or the ways that our
right. So
bodies
the book,
get to.
so right. So this book on Sarah Ruhl, these are 100 essays. I don't have time to write. What would be a play of hers that you would recommend? Just out of
Ooh,
curiosity.
yes. I love her play In the Next Room. The play's called In the Next Room, and the subtitle is Or the Vibrator Play. And the material might sound a little bit odd. It's about a historical phenomenon, which is in the 19th century, women were often, given this bizarre diagnosis of hysteria if they sort of weren't conforming to male ideals. I'm sure you're familiar with that history. And there was a practice of treating what was diagnosed as women's hysteria through vibrators, through like prosthetically induced sexual climax by doctors in the 19th century. And this is a play about this phenomenon that is not a it's not a lurid play, but it's a play about really about the use of technology to achieve intimacy. And it's always happening, the play happens in the next room from where this doctor is administering his practices. And it's all about what the possibilities are for women to achieve agency and desire, and what the technologies are for theater that could be before electricity and still transport us to a type of climax that's not a medically misdiagnosed climax. So that was a play that really threw me and excited my students too, and in our sense of like what theater could do and how it could grapple with gender and power and medicine and science, and also with all the aesthetics of theater too.
I Okay, the moment you said 19th century hysteria and the vibrators, that immediately I the only way that I knew about that was I watched Miss Fisher's Murder Mysteries.
Ooh,
And
okay.
on one of these mysteries, it actually does take place at the detective's aunt's home that she's helping women who are going through hysteria allow to live at her home to recover during that time. And there's a certain doctor that comes in, and there's a whole mystery as to what exactly happened. But one of those vibrators was one of the tools that was used in this crime. So the
Yeah.
moment you said that, I'm like, oh my God, I know exactly what you're talking about. So
Yes, exactly.
wow.
So that
Wow,
story
my
meets
goodness.
the aesthetics of Angels in America, and you would have In the Next Room or The Vibrator.
One play I have not seen yet, and I'm determined one day to see it.
Ooh, yes, that would be a thrill.
Uh, but to be sitting there for as Andrew Garfield put it, a 7.5 hour emergency. Have you actually seen the play in its entirety in one day, or was it spread over 2 days?
I saw it with Andrew Garfield
Oh,
on Broadway, more what it must have been afternoon and evening. The blessing at the end when Andrew Garfield sort of wishes the audience, more life together. It felt like we had collectively gone on this thrilling journey to hell and to heaven, and then to a renewed sense of earth. It was a transcendent experience.
hmm, awesome. On to the next one.
Number 8. So this is a play as well, and I hope it's okay to include the play because you can get it as a
Of
physical
course,
copy and you can read it. And
I'm all for it. The more books, the better. So,
great folks I have recommended it to who have read it have been as deeply moved and thrilled by it as I. So it's called Water by the Spoonful by Chiara Allegria Hudes. Hudes. And she won the Pulitzer Prize for this play, I think, in maybe 2012 or 13, 14, right around probably 2012. A play that I saw at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival in my home state of Oregon. And I just stumbled into it because I had a slot in the afternoon before my flight back to Portland, and this is what was playing at the festival. And at intermission, I thought, oh my God, is this the most amazing play I've ever seen? It takes place in two worlds. One is the barrio in Philadelphia where Chiara Alegria Hudes grew up as the child of a Puerto Rican mother and a Jewish father. And it focuses on one of her cousins who is returning from military service in Iraq with an injury and a trauma, and is trying to reckon with that pain and that burden at the moment that his mother has just passed away, and so he's sort of grieving this generational loss along with his cousins. It's a real world in Latino Philadelphia, and then the other part of the play takes place in an online chat room for crack addicts who are trying to recover through connection with each other. So there's this online world of the play, and then this real world or physical world of the play. And these two worlds at the end of the first act suddenly come together in a surprising and revelatory way. And then the second act of the play becomes, how do you take care of the people who are part of your extended community that you might not thought that you were connected to? And what are the rituals through which we can acknowledge grief and pain, be it addiction or military trauma or generational loss or family histories, and start to heal from those traumas. And the play ends with a scene of that I'd never seen on stage before, which is a scene of one character giving another character a bath, a sponge bath. And two characters who you sort of would never think would be together in this way, and who would never be caring for each other. And I had never seen two characters before who were physically intimate, but not in an erotic or a romantic context, just through the act of care. And I thought, wow, this is a playwright who has a vision of the way the world could be that is not rosy or idealistic. It is deeply attuned to pain and grief and suffering, but also has a sense that theater is the space through which you can bring people together who might not otherwise interact, and allow us to envision what our relationships to our fellow human beings might become. And so I came out of this play being like, oh my God, who is this writer, Chiara Alegria Hudes? I bought every play that she had written. It turned out Water by the Spoonful was the middle play in a trilogy about her cousin Elliot recovering from Vietnam. And there was a first one about the generations of Puerto Rican men who'd fought in different American wars, and a third one about sort of joy and healing. And each of them had a different musical style that informed the writing. So the first one was Bach fugues, classical fugues that wove together three generations of stories. And then the second one, Water by the Spoonful, is all about jazz. And it's Coltrane jazz that plays throughout the piece. And it's about dissonance and resolution, and how these things that seem jarring might be able to go together. And the third play, The Happiest Song Plays Last, is about Puerto Rican folk music, Jibaro music, and the possibilities of art as a form of activism and healing. And Chiara wrote the script, the book for the musical In the Heights with Lin-Manuel Miranda, and went on to write the screenplay for the film version. So she was kind of my gateway to contemporary playwriting as a guy who studied Shakespeare and Victorian literature, and just totally expanded my sense of what was possible in the art, and really what was possible as an American, as a human being. So I always send people to Water by the Spoonful, and I've never had somebody come away unmoved or unchanged by it.
These are plays. The music was just part of, like, I guess the background atmosphere or something that kind of like.
Yeah, you're right. They are plays. They're not musicals, but they have soundtracks. They have music that's playing, and they each have a scene where a character describes this particular type of music and turns it into a metaphor for what the play itself is about. So it's sort
Oh,
of
okay.
both the mood and the message of the play comes through its musical. form.
Okay, cool. On to the next one.
Okay. Number 9, Fun Home by Alison Bechdel. Uh, First graphic novel I think I ever read, or graphic family tragicomic, I guess she calls it, family memoir. Uh,
Mhm.
a book I might return to more than any of these books, perhaps. Probably many of your watchers and listeners know this is amazing story by great comic artist Alison Bechdel about learning that her father was gay and closeted during their childhood, learning this as she herself comes out in college, and then her father dies, perhaps in an act of suicide, and she's trying to kind of reckon with what it means to share. In part a sexual identity with her father, but wondering if that also means that she has to share what seems like a kind of maybe mental illness or condition that has shaped her father's rather painful and sometimes abusive life, and how art is going to allow her to reckon with that legacy. And each section of her comic memoir is structured around really a work of literature that she remembers reading with her father, or that was important to her. And it begins with James Joyce, and wondering sort of whether she is the child or the parent in this interaction, and thinking through James Joyce's Ulysses, which is about the relationship between a father and a child, Stephen Dedalus and Leo Bloom, and she keeps sort of changing the perspective of the cartoon frame. So she remembers her dad lifting her up on
Yeah.
his legs and hands, playing the airplane game that my
Hmm.
mom played with me and I played with my kids, and she switches the perspective of the drawing. So she's at one point looking down at her father and then looking up at her as a kid, and in both cases, her adult self looking back at this childhood self, trying to figure out what is the angle, what's the perspective on this story, who's Daedalus, who's Leo Bloom, who's James Joyce, who's the portrait of the artist as a young man, who's the artificer, like Daedalus in Greek myth, that is also sort of part of this story swirling around. And I was so having grown up forming my world through books, being Dorothy as a kid, and fashioning my life through these other writers. I was so just entranced by the way that for Bechdel, these literary models were the code that she was trying to use to unlock the mystery of her family and the mystery of her identity. It's a book that I've taught a number of times and had students really grappling with. Boy, I had a phenomenal student who shared a love of art with her father, but her father also had mental illness, and she was trying to figure out how she could stay connected to one part of her father without taking on, whether that sort of doomed her to be taking on the parts of her father that she didn't want to. And even more broadly, I think these sort of questions of what do we take from our parents,
Yeah.
and
And
who do we
wasn't,
become?
correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't Bechdel's father their fun home? Wasn't it also another side hustle as a mortuary, if I'm not mistaken?
Yes, you're absolutely right. The fun home is the funeral home in their
Thank you.
little
Yeah, yeah,
Pennsylvania town.
yeah,
Right. Yes, and is of course also this riff on what was fun or not about growing up in a funeral home. So her dad was the
yeah.
English teacher who was always reading books, and mom was involved in amateur theatricals, and her dad carried on the family business of the mortuary, and was also, it seemed, seducing his underage students at the same time. So there's sort of all these layers to her father that she's starting to unpeel and reckon with and try to understand, through the kind of multi-layered form of the comic book frame, in which she can put her own diary entries on top of a map, on top of a picture, and just blew my mind. And her second memoir about her mother, Are You My Mother, is even more amazing and fantastic, and brings
I
Virginia
have
Woolf.
that book. I have that book currently. So
Oh,
anything that, you know, I'm not a graphic novel like avid reader. The first one I read was called Castle Waiting. That was a really fun one.
hmm.
But yeah, Are You My Mother? That's the one that I've yet to read.
Oh
So
yeah. I
I don't
like
want to
I'm
give.
like you, Becca. I don't read many works of graphic literature, but these ones help me in my blinkered way, prose centric way. I think, oh wow, this is a form that can do amazing things.
So those of us that haven't read Are You My Mother, Like, what is like the, I guess, the mindset behind that one?
Right. So Alison Bechdel's mother is a kind of side character in Fun Home, which is focused on her relationship with her father. And we get a little bit of a sense of what her mother's life might have been like as she wrestles with a husband who has a different sexuality than the one that he presents to the world, and is also engaged in these inappropriate, maybe illegal relationships, and can be both very romantic and also emotionally distant. But we don't have much of a sense of her inner life, and so the second memoir, Are You My Mother, centers Bechdel's mother and concepts of mothering in this always there's always these multiple layers for Bechdel, which makes her both the panels and the narrative so fascinating. So she's investigating what it was like for her mother to grow up and become a mother alongside like mid 20th century psychology about mothering and the concept of the good enough mother, and then the Bloomsbury group and Virginia Woolf and Sigmund Freud and E.M. Forster and these writers who were also sort of part of the mix, and these dreams that Bechdel has about her own mother. So it's I love like a multi-layered text, and this one is all these different ways of thinking about what it means to be a mother. And I guess the childhood book that I used to read too. Did you read Are You My Mother? Of this little animal. I can't remember. Is it a bunny or somebody sort of roaming around trying to
Oh
find the
yeah. God, it goes. Yes, God, I read that years ago. But I think that was around the time when my brother was born. I think that book
yeah,
used to come out at that time. I'm not even sure.
right. So another
But
sort of
yeah, Are You My
literary
Mother? Yeah,
interject.
that's right. Maybe about a decade ago. That's interesting that you bring up the many layers of what it means to be a parent, but being a mother versus being a father. Because my mother wrote a little something for both my brother and I when they went off to Chile. Uh, Too many hats, and
Mhm.
as a parent, they're always wearing. I'm not a parent, but they're always wearing so many hats, and it's like for each of those hats, it's like a layer of what it means to have responsibility, what it means to have creativity, what it means to be an individual, what it means to be responsible, and all that. So I get where that story is going. So that's interesting. That's
For
cool.
sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's a wonderful way of thinking about what that layering might be doing.
hmm And finally, unless you
Finally, number
unless you
10.
wanted to provide more, so
Number 10. Yeah. Oh, it was tough. Tough to do a final slot, but this is my most recent pick, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin, which I think was everybody's favorite book like 3 or 4 years ago. This novel about two friends from high school who become computer game designers. And I have to admit, when I was told that premise, I'm not a gamer. I had zero interest in reading that story. And then I started reading it, and it opens at the Harvard Square T stop, the subway station,
Mhm.
which is where my wife and I have spent like 10 years of our life in this particular subway station through college and through graduate school. And I was like, okay, I'm hooked. I'm hooked by the setting because I've spent a lot of time trying to meet people there and find people and have hopes and dreams and frustrations there. And then what I learned, and at least the way I experienced the book, is it's fundamentally it's the book about friendship and collaboration and creativity. And it was one of the first books that I had read. It has romantic currents in it, and twisted romantic currents too, and heartbreak and tragedy and elation. But I don't think I had ever really read a novel that was devoted to a creative partnership, an intellectual and sort of project based, a creative partnership between a man and a woman, that did not revolve around sex primarily, although that does, I guess, become an element in it. But that was I felt like many of the most important relationships in my life have been creative partnerships, intellectual partnerships, study buddies, people with whom I write, people with whom I create classes, people with whom I create books, create projects, and experience art and the world and teaching and writing together. And I loved a book that centered what that feeling of being challenged and excited and frustrated and thrilled and ultimately enriched by a friendship could be.
what I loved, and I literally read that book last year. again, I want to say the books I read last year, some of them were just like, when is the end of this thing? That's what I felt when it came to tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. It's like, where's the end of this? But what I loved about that kept me going was, even though it was about two gamers, and it's like I sort of skimmed over the technical game side of it. But what I loved, and this is what happened. I don't know if it happens to you as you're reading, but when I'm reading, I don't realize that I'm reading the words. It's like the words completely disappear, and I'm seeing, like, my mind works like a movie camera. So the words disappear and the images take place as my eyes are following the words, but at that simultaneously, those words are becoming images that I'm seeing straight before me. And with that, what I loved about the piece was that the inspiration came from the Japanese painter's name that the character Sadie.
Oh, Sadie, yes. Oh, you're
Sadie.
right.
Yes, Sadie. And who was Sam? Sam was the other partner. But what they both shared was this love of the art and how and poetry, and how that could be the foundational concept of a game. Her first one, what was it, Emily? And then the next one had to do with Anne Frank and the Holocaust. And it was like, whoa, where is this going? That was just like, that was incredible. But I get where you're talking about collaboration and how people, the ones with like really creative drive, it's like they have all of these ideas, but it takes collaboration in order to make this huge thing happen, because maybe one has more power in one concept than the other one does, which is what I read when it came to Lin-Manuel. He learned not to do it all on his own. He had to depend on other people who had more of the technique, or I'm sorry, like the technicality and the know-how to get it done right. And that he had to, there's a phrase in there that I want to go over with you once we get to it, but yeah, things that had to be cut.
Right.
That was a challenging book for me. It took me maybe about 2.5 months to read. How long did it take you? I'm just curious.
Well, I love that you made the segue to Lin-Manuel Miranda, because I don't think I had even consciously put those things together, that as I was reading it, as I was writing this other book, and they're both these books about collaboration. No, I inhaled it. This for me, I know that feeling you're describing of books that you sort of wonder, when will it creep in this petty pace from day to day? No, this one I devoured in, I don't know, a couple of days or a week or so.
That's cool. But yeah, the chapter that just took me for a loop was the one about Max Watanabe. I did not, that was just like, I stopped dead in my tracks. I was like, excuse me, what happened to the breaker of horses? And I'm looking at the title going, where did the concept, that's what I'm always questioning, is like, where does the concept of the title come in? And I didn't realize that the title came from Macbeth. Did that come to you right away, or did it come to you once that chapter came up? I'm curious. You're a
Yes.
and
I
theater
mean,
guy, so.
this is the sort of occupational hazard of being a Shakespeare professor, is that the Shakespeare allusions pop out a little bit faster. And in fact, the first time I saw Hamilton, Lin-Manuel Miranda's musical, he playing Hamilton writes to his sister-in-law Angelica about his trying to get his debt plan through Congress. My dearest Angelica, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day. I trust you'll understand the reference to another Scottish tragedy without my having to name the play. And as a Shakespeare guy, I'm like, oh, I do understand the reference to another Scottish tragedy. Hamilton, son of a Scotsman, Macbeth, in this intractable political situation. And so I think my tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow reference antennae had been primed by Hamilton to look for it in the novel. Well,
I'm gonna have to watch it again. I do not. There were so many lyrics and so many things to like figure out who was saying what and what. I was like, what was he talking about? Because I'm not a rap R&B person, but I love just the energy of that show, that it kept going.
Yes.
That's
Totally.
awesome. But yeah, I did not realize it came from there. Were there any other books that you sidelined to make this 10 that you would,
Oh,
you know, any others? Just out of curiosity.
so many, so many. Well, I had actually saved some of them for your subsequent questions, so I thought I could kind of work them
Okay,
in there.
sure, sure. So on to, I guess, what do we go on to the next one? So of those 10 that you mentioned, which one would you recommend? And I'm actually going to throw this one in because there's another YouTuber named Jake. I want to say his name is Jake Edwards. He's like the YouTube librarian, but he's
Ooh.
asked other stars this particular question. Based on mine, what would you recommend for today's readers of those 10? And does that book have a special message you feel that needs to be shared? And would you say that that book should be required?
Oh,
What do you think?
uh, well, I my only allergy to required is I think once things become required, then they sort of lose the sense of discovery and pleasure
Interesting.
frequently. So
I'm
my only hesitation is not from encouraging everybody to read it, but just because
I'm
I'm
glad you
worried.
said that they lose their, what was that word you just said? That they lose their
I
interest?
don't know, the pleasure, the potency, or the thrill of discovery.
Thank you. That's exactly how I felt as a high school student and even as a college student when it comes to like required reading for this course, I'm like, I gotta read this.
Right,
It's like
exactly. Just
only if it really piqued my interest that I actually take to it. And it was only like so few out of what the 50 or 60 I had to read. So yeah,
right.
but I
And
get
I
I
mean,
get that. Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
I'm grateful for a syllabus that introduces me to things that I might not otherwise. I always remember when I was in high school, I guess, reading 100 Years of Solitude, it had this pull quote on the back from, I think it was from the New York Times Review or something in 1967 that said, "This is the first piece of literature since the book of Genesis that should be required reading for the entire human race." And I thought, oh
Whoa.
my God, wow, what what an endorsement. And I mean, obviously, right, it's stuck in my memory as this like uh the blurb of all blurbs, like the whole human race should read it. And I think that's probably true and probably is one of the most read books. I guess of the ones that I mention on my list, 100 Essays I Don't Have Time to Write is the one that I would send people to because it's totally accessible. You could just read one little essay in the little time you have and it will blow your mind because you'll get some vision about like art and humanity that you never had before. But the one that I really would love to recommend to everybody, why didn't I put this on my top 10 list? Chiara Allegria Hudi's memoir, My Broken Language, that came out just a couple of years ago. And it's the story of her growing up in Philadelphia in the 80s and 90s, the Puerto Rican mother and a white Jewish father who get divorced when she's like 6 years old. And her world is torn apart. And she feels like her cosmos is broken and her language is broken and her sense of herself is split between these two different worlds, this white Jewish world that is her father and her siblings and extended family on the one hand, and then this Boricua family that's her mom and her stepmom and her neighborhood and her cousins. And her mother is a Santeria, a Lukumi priestess who is practices this spiritual practice that is a comes from Afro-Caribbean roots and involves some animal sacrifice and some connection with spirits and the ability to prophesy and to foretell things that is very powerful and very alien to young Chiara Cuties. But she's trying to figure out what does this mean to be the child of somebody who has these special powers and these practices. She doesn't know if she will have them or not, and to be this child of a craftsman intellectual father who has some disdain for the Latino part of her family, and to be connected to a big extended network of cousins who seem more physically adventurous and older and sexually experienced than she is. And she renders the specifics of this story in just the most fantastically juicy, poetic, earthy, and prose. But I think beyond the specifics of her story, anybody who's grown up feeling this question, where do I belong? How do I put the different parts of myself together? how do I honor the traditions that I come from without perpetuating the problems or the harms of those traditions, and where can I find my voice amid those stories would resonate with my broken language. And it's the story of her becoming a writer and finding the ability through art, first as a musician, composer, and then as a prose writer to recognize that what feels to her like a broken language is actually a kind of superpower or a conduit to something fabulous. So I don't know, I would say required reading. I think the city of Philadelphia made it at City Reads Books, but I would certainly say I would love for your colleague Jake and for every librarian to have a copy of My Broken Language in their library so that any kid around the country could read it.
That's interesting. The way you were describing how she's coming from two different worlds. I'm sorry, you said her father was a Jewish father and her mother
Yeah,
was a
Puerto Rican mother.
Puerto Rican. Is she Catholic?
Well, not quite. It's Her mom really practices. I mean, there's some connections to Catholicism, but it's more this syncretic faith, Lukumi, or as it's sometimes known, Santeria. Has some elements of Catholicism and some elements of Yoruba cosmology and some indigenous elements too.
That's interesting. I'm definitely gonna have to read her memoir because how my family came to be from both my
Hmm.
mom and my father's side. Part of our family has now included family members that are Jewish, as most most of it on my dad's side. But there
Hmm.
was one. I have an uncle who married a nurse who she has a Latino background and she was a Catholic and she raised
Hmm.
both of her boys to be Catholic, but she
Hmm.
also raised them to make sure that they understood their Jewish roots. I'm gonna have to ask my cousin and my late cousin who tragically lost his life last year. I'll never
Sorry.
get a chance to ask him that, but that's interesting. I'll need to ask them what was it like to be raised, Catholic, but to be then tied to the Jewish roots. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, that's cool. All right. So, what was the last story you read, and what are your thoughts and takeaways from that read?
Ooh, okay. So I did bring a show and tell. The last book I just read was this novel Escape by my friend Stephen Fishback. Stephen and I went to college together, and we edited each other's papers on Thursday nights before they were due on Fridays. And then he was a wonderful literature student, became a writer and communications guy. And then just 15, no, 16 years ago, my wife was pregnant with our first child. Stephen told us that he was on the TV show Survivor, and we should watch. We'd never watched Survivor before. I will admit I had sort of disdain for reality TV competition shows, but we tuned in because it was Stephen. And he was this like amazing contestant on the show who was kind of cast as the like geeky city boy who didn't know how to survive in the outdoors, but could have some useful strategy to make his way through, and a good talking head, and did really well on the show. And then like had a career as a Survivor contestant and commenter and blogger and podcaster. And he's just written his first novel, Escape, which is about a reality show set on a tropical island. And
Oh,
it is that may or may not have any relationship to the show Survivor.
that's what I was going to ask you if that was his memoir of what it was like to be on the show.
Well, well, I think there are definitely elements that only somebody who's been on one of these shows would know. And so it's both like a phenomenally entertaining and thrilling adventure competition story of who's going to win this reality show on this island. It's a kind of modern day, I would say, Lord of the Flies type narrative of things start out with a premise and then they start to go south. But so that I expected. What I didn't expect is that it is also like a very perceptive and compassionate psychological exploration of what character we think we are going to become in the story of our lives, and what kind of character, what kind of role we are cast in by the circumstances in which we find ourselves. And this is kind of literalized in the world of reality competition TV shows because um, the point of view alternates between the contestants on the show and the producers of the show, who are the people who are interviewing the contestants in the like talking head segments on camera on these shows, where they cut away from the whatever the challenge was or the vote to be like, so Becca, what do you really think about Stephen? Would you say he's kind of like an animal? Is he sort of like a snake? Okay, could you say that in your own words in a complete sentence? And they're really sort of scripting in some ways what's going to happen while trying to also have it be natural and organic. So the producers on these shows have cast the show, and they have the hero and the villain and the love interest and the schemer and the saint kind of mapped out in their heads. And but the contestants have their own kind of role that they see themselves playing. Maybe they're cast as the villain, but they thought they were going to be the hero, or they were cast as the dork, but they think they're the savior figure. It made me think like far beyond the world of reality competition. Like we are all going through our lives with a sense of the role that we want to be playing, and then sometimes the frustration that we've been cast in a different role than the one that we were hoping that we would get to audition for. And so I found it ultimately this really moving book and a really reflective book, even as you're just like turning every page to find out who wins this show and who's going to survive to the end. So shout out to Escape by Stephen Fishbach.
When you were saying that the book makes you question what character you are, what's the perspective? Is it first person, third person, omniscient?
Yeah, so it shifts point of view from chapter to chapter. It's a particular contestant's point of view. It's in the third person, a kind of limited omniscient perspective. And then when it's a producer's perspective, I believe it's a first person narrative.
As a person who has written, and as a person who has written so many articles and who is a reader, is that difficult to read when it comes to switching perspectives?
Now, I have to say, it's a style of writing I love. I am thrilled when a narrative starts shifting points of view, because it gives me a sense of like discovery and variety. And often, one of the great pleasures of literature, right, is encountering a different point of view than your own. And even more so when you've been enmeshed in one point of view and then you suddenly switch to another. There's a famous section in the 19th century novel Middlemarch by George Eliot that's focused on a young woman, Dorothea, who's coming into adulthood and figuring out how to be in the world. And chapter begins, Dorothea, the narrator in third person says Dorothea, and then interrupts the sentence and says, but why always Dorothea? Why are we telling the story from her point of view? And then she switches to a different point of view and imagines it there. And I have to say, as a writer, when I was writing Lin-Manuel's story, we were often looking pretty closely in third person from his point of view. But I loved when I could sort of turn the camera around and say, wait, how is somebody else perceiving Lin-Manuel at this time? Or what's the backstory of one of his collaborators when he meets Chiara Allegria Cuties? Like, what has she been working on? So it felt to me like the equivalent of the Fun Home comic panel, the Alison Bechdel panel, would be looking from the point of view of the child at the parent, and then we'd switch and we'd be the parent looking up at the child. I love those moments when I got to switch from Lin-Manuel's point of view to his father's point of view or his mother's point of view, and I love reading that in a novel too.
Because I was going to ask you if Escape had an unreliable narrator, the way you were describing it.
Yes, absolutely. I think both the first person narrator is unreliable, the producer who thinks what she's doing is giving people a chance to shine but doesn't realize the harm that she's causing, and the third person narrator from the point of view of the contestants. Third person can often be a really lovely way of both being within a character's perspective but having a little distance on it. And Stephen Fishbach is so well attuned to the stories that we tell ourselves in order to justify the things that we want to do, that really mask over what our true motives are, or the things that we ought to know, but we kind of want to forget in any particular moment in order to prop up some image of ourselves. So yes, absolutely unreliable narrators. That'd be a good way to describe it.
The reason I ask that is because, let me ask you, have you read a book called The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien?
Yes.
Okay. The reason the way that you were describing it reminded me very much of that particular book, because and I've seen this on, like, what is it called, Course Hero. They're saying that there's two different Tim O'Briens, but I think there's three. There's the author, then there's the narrator, and then there's the character of Tim in the story. So I was just
Yeah.
curious if that escape had anything like that.
Yeah, well, I think right. There's the Stephen Fishback who who wrote the book. There's the Stephen Fishback who went on Survivor, who is now a character in people's TV shows.
Right.
And there's the Stephen Fishback who's the narrator of the book. And I remember when I was writing my biography of Lin-Manuel, at one point I was sharing chapter drafts with Lin-Manuel, and he wrote to me in his parents named him Lin-Manuel. It's a name that has a in the Tim O'Brien legacy, it's about the legacy of the Vietnam War. Lin is a Vietnamese first name, Manuel is a Hispanic surname, and it was a name that Lin-Manuel's father, Luis, had encountered in a poem by a revolutionary Puerto Rican independence fighter and poet
Yeah.
who was writing about a father who comes back from Vietnam and writes a lullaby to his child, Lin-Manuel, who's a child of Vietnamese and Puerto Rican parents, hoping that his child could grow up in a world not torn apart by American imperialist wars. This is the name that he gave to his son, Lin-Manuel, but everybody calls him Lin. And he says he's been code switching since he was 5 and went to a majority non-Latino school where people couldn't pronounce Lin-Manuel, so they call him Lin. The book, the first draft, also called him Lin, because that's what all the quotes said. And Lin-Manuel wrote to me and said, would you, Daniel, be willing to try a version of this narrative in which the narrator calls him Lin-Manuel, even though all the quotes from his friends and collaborators would be calling him Lin? Because he said that the sort of central tension in his artistic development was how to reconcile the name his parents gave him, Lin-Manuel, with the name he went by in a majority white educational and entertainment world, Lin, and finally learning to write as Lin-Manuel and bring that self into bear. And he thought if there was a narrative tension between the narrative voice and the quoted voices, that would help to
Interesting.
illustrate that. And I thought, what a great idea. It's about sort of who he is in different levels. And I remember telling my dad this, that like Lin asked if the narrator could call him Lin-Manuel. And my dad was like, "What do you mean the narrator, Daniel? That's you, right? He just wanted you to call him Lin-Manuel." Certainly knew where my dad was coming from. Yes, I am the voice of this book, more or less, but I did feel like, well, it's kind of me, but it's the narrator of the
Mhm.
book, and the narrator is parts of me, but it's not all of me, and it's also some things that I'm not, that are part of the voice that is constructing this story. So I it's a very long-winded way back of saying I appreciate the distinction that you're drawing
Yeah.
between the author of a work and the narrator of the work, because I felt very conscious of that as I was creating this book, and certainly something that Stephen Fishback is very artful with in his book
I
too.
just I just become more. I think I've become more exposed. I guess a deep dive into who or what the narrator could be since I read the book Thief. I mean, because
Mm,
I had no idea that Mark Suzak used the concept of death as the narrator. That was
yeah.
like that came out of left field. I'm just was not expecting that at all. So, but yeah. So speaking of a book, that's yeah. Did you have something else? Elaborate.
No, well, you make me think. I remember reading the Satanic Verses, Salman Rushdie's novel,
Oh,
just after
oh,
college.
oh,
Boy, I
okay.
guess Midnight's Children. That should have been on my list too. That was another book that totally changed my sense of language and the world in college, and that,
Elaborate.
as Rushdie did for so many people, and it's like this like ecstatic mixture of Bombay street slang and British literary canon and Hindu and Muslim theology and just like inimitable self-discovery in the story of like the origin of a character who's born at the stroke of midnight of India's independence from Britain, and is also the story of a country then growing up at the same time, very much in the sort of Garcia Marquez or Gunter Grass legacy of like the epic of a nation that is also the story of an individual and a family. And so then I was like, I have to read everything that Rushdie wrote. And Satanic Verses, the book that horribly was sentenced this death sentence by the Ayatollah, this fatwa,
Yes.
because it was perceived as blasphemous. And I don't think that's the appropriate response to any work of literature. But I remember thinking as I'm reading this, there are these little clues that like, oh, is like the devil is the narrator of this book. And he starts sort of like dropping hints of Rolling Stones' sympathy for the devil and other sort of demonic or satanic figures. And so that same feeling that you had reading Zuzak, I sort of had reading Rushdie of like, oh my God, is the narrator who I think the narrator is of this book? And then what does that mean for the way that we interpret it?
Cool. So, speaking of books that were disturbing, was there ever a narrative or story that was a challenge for you to complete or to read through due to the nature of the content or the subject matter?
I don't, that's not usually a feeling I have. Usually it's more the style of a book that will excite me or not. I'd say the only times I've had that feeling are with horror works. I don't read much horror fiction, and I can still remember the kind of feeling of terror and fascination and regret I had when I picked up Stephen King's It as
Mm.
a middle schooler, and there's some horrible scene of the monster clown like yanking some guy's arm down a drain and twisting it off, and the bone is then, I mean, just like, ugh, yikes. I'm sure very artfully and skillfully done, but I was like, I cannot read anymore in this world. I will suffer too many nightmares.
Okay, not sure if I want to read that one, but I have read a few of Stephen King's books, including his collaboration, and I keep forgetting the name of the author he collaborated with. But I think it was a young adult novel even. I think I'm not
Hmm.
sure, but it was called Wendy's Button Box. It was sort of like a horror taking on Coraline. The way that I was reading it, I
Oh,
was just like, oh my
yeah.
God, how much it was good, but man, it was just like, I don't know if I can stand it. I don't know if I
Yes.
would keep that book on my shelf. But I'd say it's best. And I don't know if you read The Green Mile?
No.
That one I would highly recommend because it's Dickensian. And it's
Hmm.
the fact that he actually used, I think he said something where he used Dickens's way of leading a chapter and leaving people literally hanging onto the edge of each episode. But there's nothing gory about it at all. And
Okay.
I found the story fascinating. So I would definitely recommend that one to you. And
Nice.
because let me ask you, did you see the movie of the Green
No,
Mile?
I
That
didn't.
was interesting too. I'm glad that they kept Mr. I'm not going to give too much away, but I'm glad for the film version that they kept the mouse alive right up to the end of the film. Anyway, not going to give that much away, but yeah,
Those were, you were talking about the hip hop references in Hamilton and Shakespeare references that didn't land with you immediately. There are lots of Stephen King references in early Lin-Manuel Miranda musicals, because he was obsessed with and terrified by Stephen King. And there's a lyric about the Green Mile in his first draft of his first Broadway musical, In the Heights, when in the college version of the show, and also the Stephen King horror novel, like
yes,
gave name for his the protagonist of one of his first high school musicals, 7 Minutes in Heaven, has a heroine named Beverly after the hero from Stephen
yeah,
King's It.
okay,
There's even a monster clown in an earlier musical that he wrote. So I feel like
yeah.
that's
Wasn't
the
that
territory that I don't
Nightmare?
know.
Wasn't that the one on Nightmare in D major?
Yes, good memory, Becca. Yes, Lin-Manuel's first musical when he was 16 years old that he wrote, Nightmare in D Major, has indeed a terrifying clown that is straight out of the pages of Stephen King's It. And it was an essay on Stephen King's It that Lin-Manuel wrote for his eighth grade English class
Mm-hmm.
that prompted his eighth grade teacher, Dr. Rembert Herbert, to say, hey, you're a writer. Why don't you stop fiddling around writing lyrics in the back of class and come and join us in the class discussion, and let me introduce you to the theater club where you'll find fellow people along there. So Stephen King may deserve a little you know shout out in along with Shakespeare and the Notorious B.I.G.
Right. What book in your entire collection could you not live without, and why? And does that book hold special meaning for you?
Oh yeah, well this may be a predictable answer too, but complete works of William Shakespeare, and I'm going to specify the Norton Complete Works of William Shakespeare, second edition, because I helped to edit this edition when I was
Oh,
in grad school learning to be a Shakespeare professor. If it's one of these giant 1,500 page books with rice paper thin pages to fit all of the plays in there, and they've got little annotations, and I wrote some of them.
curious. I think that's the one that I have.
No way. Let's see.
No, but it's interesting because it said I saw it on the tag. It is the second edition. The river. It's called the Riverside
Oh
Shakespeare.
yeah. So rival publisher. I'm a Norton man. I have the Riverside as well. That's a good one too. It's in my office. Yes, there are lots of these complete works. I think I was given the Oxford one for my bar mitzvah. I also have the Norton third edition and the new Oxford one and the Riverside and the and all of them. So I grew up spending summers at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, and my grandma lived in New York. My mom was from New York and met my dad, who was from San Francisco, at Reed College in Portland in the 60s, and then they stayed there to raise their kids. And we would go visit grandma and grandpa in New York every spring break and see plays together there. And my grandma was a kindergarten special ed teacher, but had a lifelong love of Shakespeare. And she gave me a copy of Lamb's Tales from Shakespeare, which were like kid prose versions of the stories for I think my eighth birthday maybe. And I sort of mistakenly called them Shakespeare's Tales of Lamb. I didn't quite know what the title was. I got lots of Merchant of Venison jokes from my parents. But I would read the stories, and then in fifth grade, I got to be in a production of A Midsummer Night's Dream,
Oh,
and
cool.
I was Bottom, the ham actor, and the Pyramus and Thisbe play within a play scene at the end. I got to have this, I think, a sort of 10-year-old fantasy of a very protracted death scene, where I just sort of convulsed with the sword in my chest for about 10 minutes, and then Bottom gets the line, "Now am I dead?" And it got this like laugh from the audience, and I was hooked on Shakespeare from that moment. And as it turns out, my wife, who was in sixth grade at the time, was playing the King of the Fairies, Oberon, in this production as well. That was the first time I remember meeting her. I was totally enchanted, and she basically ignored me for another a decade or so till we were in high school. But I credit Midsummer Night's Dream with both my vocation as a Shakespeare professor and my life happiness in marriage and in creating a family. So it definitely runs deep for me. And then each of the plays, I feel like so many different moments in my life connect to the first time seeing my grandma in a production of King Lear and identifying not with the kids but with the elders in that play, and then just returning to seeing my students do it at Portland State University last weekend, and feeling like it was a totally different play than I'd seen before. A play about what you do when a tyrant is running the country and won't listen to reason from any of his advisors. So I love sort of having the journey of my life sort of reflected back through different moments in these works, and I
Cool.
couldn't live without it.
Awesome. So I'm not sure what your schedule is, but are you taking part in any reading challenge from a local library group or another group in particular at the present time?
Oh, my kids used to do these summer reading challenges, which was fun. I guess no formal challenge. I mean, I'm part of a book club, and so we will pick a book, and then I'll read it. We just read Marriage at Sea by Sophie Elmhurst, about a British couple in the 70s who set out to sail from England to New Zealand, and about halfway around the world in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, an injured sperm whale crashes into their boat and sinks it, and they're stuck on their life raft for 118 days until a shipping vessel shows up. And
Wow.
I am a sucker. I'm a sucker for any narrative involving a sperm whale. That ought to be on my list too. Moby Dick. That's a book
Did you read that one?
I read it many times, and my dad read it to me when I was a baby. He told me he said I wasn't going to understand anything, when I was 6 months old or whatever, anyway, that he was reading, so that he might as well read something that he liked. And he loved Moby Dick. And I can't say I remember it, but I grew up with a childhood fascination with sperm whales, the type of whale that Moby Dick is, which was not widely shared by my peers and classmates. So I think some of it must have seeped into it. And now I find it, this is the most sort of thrilling and wondrous book. Now I'm revising my list as I write it. We're going to put Moby Dick back on it. So anytime we get a sperm whale, I'm
That's
happy.
cool because mine is all about, like the merfolk and all that,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
and whales and maritime history, nautical history. all of that. That's
Hmm.
all of my. I have a complete fascination for that. So here comes the big question. As a reader and a writer, what do you believe is the biggest obstacle that is facing our readers today in the wake of more current and challenged books from the year before, and considering students and teachers, the libraries, and bookstore clientele? What do you think is happening? What do you think is the biggest obstacle that we're facing right now?
I got looking at that list of banned books, I guess I shouldn't have been surprised at how many of them basically were any book that was trying to provide support and community and identity for trans and LGBTQ kids in particular, and then also books about people of color and stories that reckon with histories of racial injustice in America. And I'm deeply saddened by that. My only hope is that the censors, in some ways, are people who recognize the power of literature and are afraid of that power, not to convert anybody, but to offer a sense that there's more than one way to be a person. There's more than one way to have a body. There's more than one way to love and form community and form identity in the world. I hope that the proliferation of digital distribution channels for books, which has its own problems, but I hope that means that folks who would like to encounter works like The 57 Bus or The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian or um, other books that are on that list won't be confined by the fears of local parent organizations or the limitations that are placed on local booksellers and librarians, and we'll be able to get them digitally through Libby or through lending libraries or through Kindle or other platforms, and get some sense of community that way.
Did you read and watch Wicked?
Yes,
Okay.
read, stage, movie.
Okay. So recently there was a report that McGuire's Wicked book was banned permanently in the state of Utah. Just curious, what are your thoughts on that? Just to actually have it like be banned by a state.
I mean, I really, I guess I try, through literature that offers you different points of view. I try to be compassionate to whoever it is, the legislators or the parents or the school board who feels some threat from this book.
Or maybe it was like the school board in Utah. I'll have to look back at the report. But
Yeah,
yeah, I was just curious if you knew anything about that. And
I haven't heard about that. And indeed, I mean, it's so ironic because this is what the story Wicked about, right? Is about is this fear of someone who seems different and a scapegoating of an enemy as the way to try to unite people in the face of political authoritarianism, and that's exactly then it sounds like what some authorities are doing with this book. And I can see a world in which you would want to steer your kids toward reading certain books at certain ages or not. But I really hope that parents would trust their kids and their teachers enough to feel like you could encounter a story that's different from your own. You could encounter ideas that are different from your own without having to threaten your own identity. And that perhaps what's the worst that can happen is you just come to a broader, more compassionate understanding of the different ways there are to be in the world. So I'm deeply saddened by those bans, and I'm glad when I love a bookstore or a library that features the banned books month so that we can support those books and make sure that they're staying in circulation.
so, were there any besides Wicked? Were there any other books on the challenge list that you've already read, but today's readers are being told, or that those books are now challenged for this generation?
Right. Yes. A number of the books from Kendi's books, and Tango Makes Three. Fun Home was on that list. This the book I've seen my students thrill to and feel like they find community with and find support from and are intellectually challenged by. The book that I would lift up from that list is a journalistic book, a nonfiction book for, I would say, sort of middle-age or high school readers by Dashka Slater called The 57 Bus. And it's a book, it takes place in Oakland, California. And my Aunt Jude, my dear Aunt Jude, who lives in Oakland, sent a copy to me and my son for us to read together. We read it out loud when my son was in middle school. And it's a true story and a very beautifully reported story about a horrible thing, which is a trans transgender teenager who was set on fire on the 57 bus by another teenager. A horrible crime. But what the book does is tell the story both of the teenager who was set on fire and what her journey had been before and after, but also the story of the other teenager who did this act and what his journey was before and after. Not to excuse anything about what he did, but to understand his life circumstances, and in particular to explore what kind of criminal justice system then took him up after this incident. And in a way, I think the book is really about, it's both beautifully about these two young people and how terribly misunderstood their paths were to each other, but also about what the institutions are, from school institutions to criminal institutions to penal and correctional institutions, and where their structures don't align with what our values might be for how to raise kids in a community. In particular, sort of the limitations of criminal justice for either providing rehabilitation or a sense of restitution for a victim or survivor. I thought that was a wonderful book that broadened my sense of how to think about justice and how to think about community. And my son found it really moving too. And I'm sorry that anybody would be deprived of the chance to explore Joshka Slater's 57 Bus.
Are there any organizations, charities, or special events taking place that our viewers should investigate, donate, or participate in that you can think of right now?
Sure. Well, as a friend of mine to me in Portland, Oregon, where I'm speaking now, we have a big crisis of unhoused population, and my family's been really impressed with the work that an organization called Path Home, P-A-T-H Home, provides, which is providing sustainable housing and long-term housing solutions for families who are experiencing houselessness. And they really changed my understanding of how to treat houselessness. And their solution is basically you provide housing first, and that then helps to solve all the other problems of employment, of education, of health services too. And they provide short-term housing for families, and then the support to prevent families from being evicted and to get them back into housing when they need it. So Path Home is an organization I love in Portland, and perhaps there are similar types of organizations in your listeners' communities that they might learn about and support. My kids have been very moved by too. And then I'm wearing a sweatshirt to rep the Oregon Shakespeare Festival in Ashen, which is my artistic training ground, and not only the place that introduced me to Shakespeare and performance, but also to the work of contemporary playwrights, and got me writing about who our Shakespeares might be today, and sort of expanded my canon of how we tell the stories of our country and who can tell those stories. So it's a place I recommend to anybody on the West Coast. You're looking for a wonderful weekend this summer, or you're driving through, stop at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, or find out what the local theater is in your community that is telling new stories or old stories in new ways, and get a ticket, or bring a student, or bring a friend, so that we can make sure that we've got that vitality happening all across America.
I usually try to attend, especially I usually go for the comedies, but at Cal Lutheran during the summer, they have the Kingsman Shakespeare Festival there. And they have it outside. They have like these lawn boxes. People can bring, food there, and then it's basically like dinner and a show. I don't think they perform any of the modern plays. It's just all Shakespeare.
Sure.
So, yeah.
So remind me where you're based.
Southern California.
Gotcha. Yeah. So many wonderful theater companies there.
Yeah. So before I get to the book, I wanted to actually ask you what was the drive behind you wanting to become an English major? And then what gave you the drive to go beyond that to get your PhD, right? But to then infuse theater and Shakespeare. What was like the spark, like the aha moment?
Yes. I remember, so I was a history major in college, and I studied literature as well. And then after college, my high school girlfriend, had been Oberon in our in our Midsummer Night's Dream back in elementary school. She graduated a year ahead of me from college and was teaching at the American School of Paris, which got its sort of, we didn't quite realize this at the time, but basically it's cheap migrant labor from American college students so they didn't have to pay French Social Security wages. And her roommate was teaching literature, and then her roommate went to law school. So she needed a roommate, and the school needed a literature teacher. And I didn't know what I was going to do after college. But I liked literature and I wanted to live with Laura in Paris. And so I applied for this job and they hired me. And the first day I started teaching, this was high school literature, ninth, 10th, 11th, 12th grade. And I thought, oh my God, this is so much fun. This is like socially responsible hedonism. Like I get to talk about books I love and through that process help young people develop a sense of their voice and help them develop confidence that they can enter the conversations that matter to them and that they can express themselves in ways that will influence and shape the world around them. So that was the spark for me. It's like that's what I want to do. And then after doing it for a couple of years, helping to start a school in California while my wife was in law school, then I just wanted to have some more time to write. And so grad school was the draw there. And I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to focus on. I'd had this experience on my honeymoon reading Our Mutual Friend and getting involved in the thrills of Victorian literature. But I always had my grandma sort of in my head saying like Shakespeare is the pinnacle of culture in English. And then I learned that these Victorian novelists I liked, like Dickens and George Eliot and Thomas Hardy, were actually as obsessed with Shakespeare as I was. And they were quoting Shakespeare all the time in their novels, and they wanted to be like the Victorian Shakespeare and use the novel to do the kinds of things that Shakespeare used plays to do in Renaissance England, like reflect society back to itself and experiment with what language and character could do. So I decided, oh, that's what I'll focus on. I'll write about the use of Shakespeare in 19th century literature. So I get to be both a Shakespearean and a British novel guy. And so I learned a lot through doing that, and that really got me interested in like who are the Shakespeares in later days. And so when I moved back to Oregon to become a professor and started taking groups of students and alumni to the Oregon Shakespeare Festival every summer, my question was like, well, who are our Shakespeares now in America? Who are telling like the big scale national stories about who we are as a people, who we could be, who we have been? And it was 2015. Chiara Alegria Hudy's Water by the Spoonful had gotten me interested in contemporary playwrights. And I was writing an article for the New Yorker about this sort of question of like, who are our Shakespeares now? And this producer in New York said, well, have you checked out this hip hop musical about the American Revolution by this guy, Lin-Manuel Miranda? Like, he's writing a Shakespeare style history play. It's in verse. It's taking the ordinary language of the people and elevating it to an art form. And it's about who the bodies are that could come on stage. And it's got like soliloquies and dialogue and reversals of fortune. And it's personal and it's political at the same time. So it so happened that my New York grandma was having her 90th birthday this summer in 2015. We went to New York to celebrate with her. We had a night of babysitting. And my wife said to me, like, she would take me out to a fancy restaurant or with our one night out, or she would take me to see this new show called Hamilton on Broadway. And glutton that I am, I said, fancy restaurant, please. That sounds exciting in New York. But it was grandma who said, no, you got to see this. You got to see Hamilton. It's like going to be the next big thing. So the night we went, it was in previews on Broadway. And then Vice President Joe Biden was sitting down the row from us, which was like a thrill and a pain because it meant nobody else could use the bathroom at intermission because the Secret Service had like shut it down for him to experience. But like, watching Hamilton, watching basically a series of American presidents and vice presidents rapping on stage next to the sitting vice president, I thought, oh my God, this is like as close as I could get as a Shakespeare professor to watching Henry V in 1599 next to like Queen Elizabeth. It's like the performance of the origin of American power for the elected representative of American power in this phenomenal mode that is combining hip hop and Broadway and Shakespeare when Hamilton says tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace. And I thought I missed the first 400 years of Shakespeare reception history of all the different ways that his plays have been interpreted, but I can be here on the ground level when Hamilton starts changing America's story. And so I became a kind of professional Hamilton groupie and writing articles for magazines when I went to London to bring the American Revolution to see the former British Empire, and then to Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria to find out how this show could help to revive an island's, Lin-Manuel's parents' island's fortunes, and that's what led me to write a book about it.
Well, two things. You said that that your question was Shakespeare in 19th century minds or something. Is that what you stated before?
Oh, and for my dissertation in grad school, it was about
That's what I was
how,
going to ask you. That's what you
yeah,
said. Okay, thank you.
exactly, how 19th century novelists adapted Shakespeare in their writings.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank
that
you.
was the only other thing I've published that has a cover on it, and that's been read by, I think, two people. Um,
Okay. All right. And then when it came to writing for like the New Yorker and all these other theater magazines, did they reach out to you, or did you reach out to them, or how did you get like commission?
I sent a pitch to an editor. So this it happened actually because of the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. About a decade ago, they'd hired a bunch of playwrights, contemporary playwrights, mostly women, mostly writers of color, to translate Shakespeare's plays into modern English. And I thought, oh, this sounds like a cool experiment. But I started hearing from all these people who'd gone on Shakespeare trips with me messages being like, aren't you outraged by this? Isn't this blasphemy? Isn't this desecrating Shakespeare to like change his language? And I thought, oh, I guess people are having this reaction. No, I don't feel that way because I wrote my dissertation about the centuries long history of adapting Shakespeare. So I know we've been doing this for a long time. I'm not worried about it. And I wrote an email to our local newspaper, the Oregonian, asking if they'd like a piece from a local Shakespeare professor explaining why it's fine to translate Shakespeare. And in fact, we've been doing it for hundreds of years. And they never got back to me. But it so happened that one of my high school pals, actually one of my wife's cousins, Lisa Rosenbaum, who's a wonderful writer, was writing pieces for the science section of the New Yorker about her research, which is in medicine. And we'd written stuff together in high school. And she was like, if you ever have an idea, send it to me, she would say, and she would pass it on to the editor. So by this point, the New York Times had picked up this story about these crazy Oregonians who want to translate Shakespeare, and it had become kind of a national debate. Was this a good idea or not? So I sent in this pitch of like, it's okay to translate Shakespeare. We've been doing it for hundreds of years. And my friend passed it on to her editor, who passed it on to the literature editor at the New Yorker, who said, okay, yeah, make the argument. And I remember, I don't know if you feel this way ever, Becca, when you have a project of like initial elation. Oh my God, I'm going to write something maybe for the New Yorker, which I've been reading my whole life. And then immediate imposter syndrome of like, oh my God, how am I going to possibly write this? There are so many other people who know so much more about this topic than I do and are so much smarter than I and will realize that I know nothing about it. But my son was in kindergarten and I would bike him to school. Which was downhill, so he would ride his bike. And then I would have to bike back uphill to our house and then drive and get his bike and him at the end of the school day. So I had just like pump me up music on my playlist to get me up the hill back home from dropping off my kid. In the morning, I got this email from the editor. On the playlist was Hamilton because it was 2015, and so as I'm biking up this hill, in my ears I hear, I am not throwing away my shot. I am not throwing away my shot.
Yeah.
You got it. And I'm like, okay, this is a message from the universe, or at least my playlist. Like, this is your shot. Give it a try. So I wrote a terrible first draft and sent it in to the editor. And I still show my first year writing students, sent me back this like track changes draft with every single line crossed out in red Microsoft Word track changes. And we went through 7 drafts of this
Wow.
piece in a week. And then it went through like 4 rounds of fact checking and copy editing. And then, lo and behold, it appeared on the New Yorker's website. And seeing my words in this font that I revered and sort of associated with like sophisticated literary culture was totally intoxicating. And I thought, okay, I want to do this again. And so I would just, whenever I had an idea, I would send in a pitch to the wonderful editor who guided my pieces. And then that helped me learn how to pitch other editors and expand the career from there. And then when I'd written a number of articles, then a literary agent came to me via a wonderful mentor and said, you want to expand these and write a book.
That's awesome. So now, speaking of which, let's hop to
You got the book.
this book. Yeah.
Look at those
So,
sticky notes.
and as you can see, a lot is flagged. So
amazing.
And I'm going to start with the epilogue. It took you 3 years to compile or to write the book in its entirety?
3 years from getting a contract
Hmm.
and starting to research the book to having a complete edited manuscript of the book. So that's like basically 2 years of research and a year of writing. Yeah.
Cool. And during that time, were there any other projects that you were working on, other articles at the time, or was it just solely focused on this?
I did. I think I did a couple Atlantic pieces and one big New Yorker piece and teaching at Portland State University. But I was fortunate to have a fair amount of writing time, particularly in the summers, is when the bulk of the writing got done.
And when they ever got
It's
to
when
it.
Lin-Manuel writes the first Hamilton draft when he's in high school.
Yeah, I think so. Either that or no. When he was visiting, he actually was either he was close or that he visited the homes between Burr and Hamilton and where they lived. Like he was actually there at the locations of this. So, and you were talking about we had discussed about narration,
Hmm.
and then what was it like when it came to collaborating with Lin, and what were your takeaways from this overall genius? What I loved about the book is that he said something ties ties to you, is that he creates in order to continue learning.
Yeah.
What is your takeaway from the fact that he said that?
I love that. That really for me was the impetus for writing this book. And the subtitle is The Education of an Artist. And here's a guy who has always wanted to make art since he was a little kid, and his dad brought home a video camera from work, and he started making stop motion animation movies with his Coke bottles and making up little stories to songs for his Garbage Pail Kids. It's like he's created, to my mind, like the most thrilling and transformative popular art in America in the 21st century. But he didn't start out knowing how to do all these things. He wasn't like Mozart, coming into the world as a 3-year-old able to compose sonatas and concertos. He played piano a little bit, but he kind of like making up stuff more than practicing. He was not the best singer, the best music theorist, or the best composer among his peers, and in fact, he frequently felt a sense of inferiority to really brilliant classmates in New York who could
Yeah.
pick up any instrument and play at sight or sight read music or write it out really fast. But he had this supreme desire to learn from everybody that he met and to sort of soak up like a sponge, which was a metaphor that a lot of his collaborators used for him, every type of art form that he encountered. And he sort of felt like he could just try it out. He had this what we sort of call in school these days a growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset. Fixed mindset is like I'm good at this, I'm bad at that. Growth mindset is like I haven't learned how to do this yet. So he told me he wasn't inhibited the way that many of his classmates were, with the gap between what he could make as a teenager, starting to create his, feature films or write musicals, and the Lin-Manuel felt like, unlike many of his classmates who were kind of inhibited by the gap between what they could do when they started out making art and the works of art that they admired, he told me he knew he wasn't going to make Citizen Kane the first time he picked up a video camera. He knew he wasn't going to compose Rent or Sweeney Todd the first time he started writing a musical, but he felt like he could collaborate with the people at his high school to start and then in college who knew how to sing, who knew how to play instruments, who knew how to perform. And he would learn by making things how to do it better. And it's just like astounding how quickly he got really good at doing this stuff. But also that Hamilton was his eighth musical that he'd written to that point, including high school and college shows. And the first ones are ones that he has not put on YouTube and he's not eager to have on Broadway because they were learning experiences. And so I love that sense that you didn't have to just know how to do everything that you wanted to when you started, but you could just try at whatever level you were and have confidence that Nightmare in D Major is a musical about the ghost of a fetal pig that comes back to haunt the kid who dissected him in AP bio class could give him the sort of the first test ground that would then become, 30 years later, a show like Hamilton.
There was a chapter in here that I was surprised that they even did it, but I love how you added the note that he inserted. It says here in the chapter called Basketcase, which
Oh
I didn't
yeah.
know, and that was one of the musicals that he wrote.
That's right.
It had to do with a high school shooter.
That's right.
But what's interesting here is that it says Basketcase was set to open in the student-run theater on Thursday, September 13th, 2001. That Tuesday, the company had a tech rehearsal scheduled for the evening. And then a little later on, he says, before leaving Midtown that morning, he stopped by a record store to pick up Bob Dylan's new CD so he could listen to it in his car on the day it was released, September 11th. When he got to the register, the clerk, who looked like a stoner, mentioned that someone had just tried to blow up the World Trade Center. And then he bought the CD, got back in his car, turned on the radio, and the Twin Towers had fallen. I remember I had been to New York twice in my life. And when I went there in 97, that was a museum and Broadway show trip. That was the only reason we went. I mean, it's like New York is like synonymous with original Broadway. Where were you on 9/11 when all of that occurred?
I was in Paris in the English department at the American School, and it was 6 hours ahead. So it was about 3:50 p.m. right at the end of the school day. So I was not in New York, but my college roommate was working in the 91st floor of one of the towers, and he was always early to work. And so the next few days were all of the roommates, all of the friends from college trying to find out what had happened to Brad. And then it turned out that Brad Horn had been in the tower and lost his life that day. So then it became collecting memories of him for his parents and setting up a scholarship fund to honor him and trying to remember the loss. So I think for, probably like for you and many of your listeners, that's a day that was seared in my memory. And I was really interested that Lin-Manuel had written this show his junior year in college that was about an act of violence, school shooting, it was a jukebox musical of 90s pop and rock songs, and he got interested in trying to string them together into a show and prove that pop music could tell a musical theater story. And he started with Pearl Jam's song Jeremy, 90s grunge anthem about a kid who commits a school shooting, and he wondered, like, what could you make that kid a protagonist of a show? So he had this show that's about this horrible act of violence, and it was supposed to open 2 days after 9/11. And he describes it as like, you make something and then the world changes. What do you do? And that was sort of his training ground for how to handle a different environment. And that became a recurring element in his career. He'd make something and then Hurricane Maria would happen, or Black Lives Matter would happen, or Trump's election would happen. How would he respond? How would he learn to handle that moment?
And that's what I wanted to ask you. What do they mean by jukebox musical? That's like a far cry from like Oscars and Hammerstein. Would that be considered the classical musical versus, I'm not even sure what the new musicals are called now, modern contemporary jukebox? What's the difference?
Oh, right. Okay. So the difference is a Rodgers and Hammerstein musical, they've written original songs to tell a story in Oklahoma or South Pacific. Whereas a jukebox musical is the metaphor of like, you put a quarter in the jukebox and it plays a song. It's a musical that is put together from already existing songs. So you go to see Mamma Mia, the musical, is a jukebox musical that's taken from existing ABBA songs and then strung together to tell a story. And it's actually a form that predates Rodgers and Hammerstein. A lot of 1920s and 30s musicals, Cole Porter or Gershwin musicals, were jukebox musicals that took their hits and strung them into a story to make a musical. But it's now become an increasingly popular form of like you take Michael Jackson hits and you put them together to make MJ the musical, or Neil Diamond hits together to make whatever the Neil Diamond musical is called, or the Alanis Morissette Jagged Little Pill musical. And so it's basically you making a musical out of songs that already exist from other artists. And that's what they want to do, sort of experiment in using pop styles.
And this chapter 7, the moment I saw the chapter heading, I'm like, this is me back in the 80s, back in either the 80s or 90s, VOLTRON. Because I used to watch that show too. I used to watch that show. I loved that show. That was like a precursor to my watching the Power Rangers, which I came to love a few years later. But it's interesting when it came to In the Heights, the VOLTRON, when I think Tiara Hudez comes into the picture, right?
Yes.
And then all of the powerhouse people behind all of their professional backgrounds, and how Lin-Manuel was able to then learn how to collaborate with all those forces, coming together with the help of Jill Furman. There was a reference to the why he wanted to get it done was because he had seen Rent as
Yeah.
a teen, and that from the autobiographical Tick Tick Boom, he'd struggled for years to get his show produced. So he was basically the one who thought of everything. This is how I see it. This is how I'm hearing it. But how do I make all of that happen? When it comes to today's contemporary and modern first time theatrical director debuts, from what you wrote, what are some takeaways that you would advise them?
That's so interesting. When I love that you knew the Voltron reference. That for me, 80s cartoon television is like is what I don't know, Shakespeare references are to somebody else. Like I had that black and white TV.
Right.
I was not watching these shows. I had to like do archival research to find out what Voltron was as this metaphor for the robot that can bring together all the other robots' powers like Lin-Manuel's collaborators could. So I would say a couple things that stick out to me from Lin-Manuel's story for new creators is what's the show that only you can write? What's the work of art that you haven't seen before that your experience or your curiosity or your knowledge can shape? So for Lin-Manuel, this was growing up a child of Puerto Rican parents in New York, and the only Puerto Ricans he saw on stage were the gang members in West Side Story, and then gang members in Paul Simon's musical The Caveman. And he thought that wasn't the experience he had in his neighborhood. That wasn't his family's story. There was a missing story of Puerto Rican immigrants and of Latino community in New York, and that's what prompted him to write his first musical, In the Heights. So what's the story that's missing? And that's what I ask my students to do at the end of our course on the American musical. I say, what's missing from the story we've told? What would you like to add to this story? And students will come up with wonderful shows sometimes about their own family's immigrant journey, sometimes about mental health conditions that they haven't seen represented on stage before. I had this amazing student who had what's commonly known as sort of multiple personality disorder. She hears different voices in her heads. She'd only ever seen Jekyll and Hyde as a representation of that condition. And she
Mm-hmm.
said that's not what her experience is. It's not
Yeah.
homicidal rage. It's a sort of a source of creativity. And so she wrote a new show about bringing different voices in a character's head together. So I love that. What's the show that only you can write? Then the next step, though, is that Lin-Manuel didn't his first impulse didn't end up on Broadway. He wrote a draft of In the Heights when he was in college, and I read it. It's wonderful. It's delightful. And there's not a single phrase or song or scene or melody from that show that ended up in the Broadway version, except for the title phrase. In Washington Heights, every single part of it got rewritten over the next 8 years. And
Yes.
so the next step is who are the collaborators who will help you make the work that you can't make on your own? For Lin-Manuel, that was a director, Tommy Kail, who said, your third song needs to be your first song, and your minor character needs to be your main character. And here's how we're going to bring audiences into the story. It was a music arranger who said, okay, you can hear this stuff in your head, but we can't hear it in the piano. Let's flesh out the musical colors. It was the playwright Chiara Allegria-Hughes who said, you have female characters, but you don't have female protagonists. How can we bring out the women's stories in this show and make it about a whole community, not just love stories? So
Yeah.
what's the impulse? What's the story that's missing that you can tell? And then who are the people who can help you tell it in a far more complex and rich and realized way than you could on your own?
And here's what I mentioned earlier on where it came on page 113 that one of the characters had to go originally from his original production, Lincoln. And it
Yes.
says here, murder your darlings is common writing advice, but it's hard to execute. Murder your darlings is the same way as like killing. It was hard for him to kill his baby. As a writer, is that something that you phrase differently to your students who want to become writers on their own or like even in the theatrical field?
You mean, do I try to get away from a homicidal metaphor?
Yeah, because someone I think it was one of the editors that I had interviewed, Brianna, who had spoke about murder. I think who said murder your darlings, and it's like, and she says there's another way of like rephrasing it, but it still means the same thing. I'm just curious.
Yeah.
What are your takeaways from that?
It's not a phrase that I would say I use on my own, that, other than when in the book people are quoting it to me. I would see it more, and I experienced this acutely myself. So the publisher wanted 300 pages, and my first draft was 600 pages. To my surprise. I didn't think it was going to be that long, but I got excited about the story and I learned a lot and I wanted to put it all in. And so we had to cut out half the book, basically. And that was tricky to do. And it didn't feel like an act of murder, but it did feel like a question of priority. And I felt like I learned a lot from Lin-Manuel and how he edited his work in doing my own. And basically, his question was always, well, what does the story need? And if the story doesn't need this part, even if it's a great part, then it's not going to be part of the story. So indeed, the main character of his first lines got cut out. He thought his best rap in Hamilton, a rap that he wrote for Hamilton to denounce John Adams. They cut right after the first night of previews because the show was too long and John Adams wasn't a character on stage, and so a rap about him didn't need to be there. So I thought, so that for me, not a violent metaphor, but felt to me more like a metaphor in service of the story. Is what does the story need? And this for me is a story about the education of an artist. So my editor would always say to me, like, what's Lin learning in this moment? And if he's not learning, I had a whole section about this show I loved. He wrote a 15-minute musical called 21 Chump Street for This American Life right before Hamilton opened. Just totally delightful. You can watch it on YouTube. About a kid who falls in love with a new girl in his high school, and she asks him to get pot, and he does for her, and then she turns out to be an undercover police officer and arrests him. It's a great, funny, then tragic show, and I loved writing about it. But my editor said, okay, this is fun, but Lin-Manuel's not learning anything, and we need to open Hamilton. Like, that's what this chapter is about. So I was like, okay, I'm going to save that. Maybe it'll become another project later on. And that's the other thing Lin-Manuel does, is when he cuts stuff, he always saves it, and he works it in later. So his latest album, The Warriors, has all of these little snippets from like his college shows and his high school shows that he reworks. So I see it less as killing and more as like, save it for the next thing.
Yeah. And then there was on page 120, just before chapter 9 on Off Broadway, when he was with Vanessa, it bridges in that video games of Grand Theft Auto. But something here I didn't quite, I kind of got it, but I'd like you to elaborate. It says here, Lin-Manuel hadn't completed any missions. He just stole bikes and got shot. As a result, his avatar was spindly and unimpressive. You have to do the missions, Vanessa told him. I guess there was a difference between the two of them. He was, to him, that felt like a metaphor for their relative professional positions. He was still substitute teaching, which I didn't know that he did, and living in a messy bedroom while she had an impressive job as a scientist and drove to work in her own car. I'm going to be worthy of her. I got to do the missions. I kind of get it, but can you elaborate?
This was new to me as well, Becca. I don't play Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, so I'm relying on Lynn's account of it. But I guess it's a video game. You can just sort of fool around in it and steal stuff, and use kind of your whoever your character is in the game stays the same. Or if you complete these challenges, like you go and find this thing and bring it back, or you set a goal and you accomplish it, then your character gets to acquire new powers and new resources in the game. And that's called doing a mission. And so he was just fiddling around, and his character in the game, his avatar, was never getting stronger, was never getting more stuff. Whereas his new girlfriend, Vanessa, who was very goal oriented, she would her character would go out and find the thing or steal the thing or whatever that would allow her character to get a house or to get a car or to get a partner within the world of this game. And for Lin-Manuel, that became like a kind of analogy for their lives outside the video game, which is like, he wanted to write this musical, but he'd write a song here or there, and he'd take a side job, and he's just sort of trying to cover his rent. Whereas Vanessa, the chemical engineer at MIT, and worked as a scientist and had an apartment and had a car, and seemed much farther along in the game of life than Lin-Manuel was. And he felt like, okay, if he's gonna be a good match for her, he's gonna have to start setting goals and coming through on them. And for him, the mission, the goal was write the musical, finish the musical.
And then for when he gets to Hamilton, when he took the book, I think just before he went on his, before he married her, there's something here that I thought was interesting. How is he going to take the 900-page book of Hamilton and squash it into less than 3 hours of a musical? It says compression became his goal. Mm-hmm. So he says, you got to take the first 30 or 40 pages of my book and condense it into a 3-minute song. And I wanted to ask you if you read Les Miserables.
The Victor Hugo novel?
Hmm.
No, I've never read it.
Okay, I still have yet to finish it. It's been over what, 20 or something years. But when I was reading it, I could see how and I keep forgetting who wrote the book and who wrote the music and the lyrics for it, but I could see in certain chapters, oh, this is where that lyric came from. Oh, this is where that lyric came from. I see how they did this, and it's astounding. It's astounding to me. And so when I was reading this, I was like, compression. How do we get all this information into one piece, into one song? Which I thought that
Right.
was just. I'm glad that you highlighted that, and I wanted to get your take on this. He would use words that would rhyme or like end the same way. He was told to read something about the making of a musical, and I think I was it Ira Gershwin that he wrote on how to write lyrics or something. That he
Yes,
took away
good
from
memory.
that. For like any of the books that he mentioned that he had to read, did you do the research and follow up on that based on those? And what were your takeaways?
Yes. Yes, I did. That was sort of the fun thing is like Voltron, like a Notorious B.I.G. reference, like everything that Lynn read, I wanted to go back and read as well. And it is amazing looking back at Ron Chernow's biography of Alexander Hamilton, which is this like Dickensian length book. It's so fun to go back and read it, and you're like, oh, there's a line, just like you say with Les Miserables, that comes into the show. Chernow will say that Hamilton wrote his way out of poverty, and that becomes a whole musical motif in the show. I wrote my way out. Hamilton sings in the song Hurricane. So it wasn't so much the material itself in the book, it's what Lin-Manuel took from the material, and what he, like where he heard a song or where he found a phrase that was really exciting to see. And this is part of his sort of sponginess, is like he would have a song introducing Aaron Burr, a character in the show that would have like an equivalent from a paragraph in Chernow, but would also have like the cadence of a Dr. Seuss rhyme that Lin-Manuel had read when he was a kid and would read to his kids, of like rhyming
Yeah.
on the penultimate syllable, and then like an Eminem reference too. And it was sort of like everything he'd ever encountered was an ingredient that he could put in his soup, or like a tool that he could use in his toolkit. And it was exciting to see all of them start to come together.
And then let's jump to the chapter that I wanted to read the most, and it was and I didn't realize that it was covered over two, but I did want to highlight the fact that Tick Tick Boom stopped,
Yeah.
and everyone was surprised that Andrew Garfield remained in it. I'm glad that you highlighted where Lin-Manuel slipped into the rehearsal for Boho Days, and I remember in several of the interviews that Andrew Garfield had done, and I want to be able to interview him one day.
Yeah.
But that Miranda had thrown his shoe at him, which I guess was his mark of approval. He's like, you're in
Right.
it. I don't have to recast you. But then suddenly, March 12th of 2020, because I remember when this took place, COVID literally shut everything down. What was going on with you when this happened? And from your standpoint, what happened to the theater community, and where were you stationed during that whole shutdown when this
Right.
took place?
Boy, so you're taking me back, taking me back to 9/11 and then to COVID. Those are the two big sort of collective traumas of the or two
Yeah.
among them at least. I remember I was at opening weekend of the Oregon Shakespeare Festival in March 2020, and there were these sort of rumors of something going around. We're like, is it safe to travel? Is it safe to be at a theater? I guess we could probably be there. Do we hug people? I'm not sure. And we saw the opening of each of these wonderful plays, and that was the last performance of any of those plays because they all shut down. And I remember my editor at The Atlantic actually had asked me to write a piece about what was going to happen to Broadway. And it was like changing moment by moment as I was researching the story. At first, things were going to be closed for a day, and then they're going to be closed for a week. And what I ended up doing in the piece was looking back to Shakespeare's acting company, because they were shut down by plagues in the 16th and 17th century. It wasn't the coronavirus, it was the bubonic plague. And
Mm.
people at the time didn't really know how it was transmitted. They didn't know about the bacteria on the flea on the rats, but they thought it was spread through bad air. So any congregating of people would be shut down if the death rate reached a certain level in a particular parish. And it seemed totally uncertain, totally potentially devastating for everybody's livelihood. And the sort of Shakespeare parallel that a lot of people were looking at is like Shakespeare wrote all this stuff while he was at home during the pandemic, but in fact his company was only able to survive because they had in essence government subsidies. They were the king's men, and so the royal coffers would bail them out when they didn't have a box office, or they'd travel to places in essence, or screens that didn't have that weren't shut down in the provinces. So I hope that by writing about that would be an encouragement for government and other funding organizations to support theater communities when they couldn't get revenue from the box office, so that they would be able to survive for the opening. But a tremendously uncertain and devastating time for not only artists but for everybody.
Right. And then for you, were you teaching at the time, and did you have to resort to doing everything online?
Yes, boy, now you're taking me back. I remember, yeah, in this room teaching my Shakespeare class on Zoom while my daughter was in third grade on Zoom and my son was in sixth grade on Zoom and my wife was trying to conduct her law practice on Zoom as well. There always seemed to be one fewer number of rooms or computers in our house than we needed for the number of people who had to be online, and our little puppy was running around. And so we were fortunate. We had a safe home to be in at that time. But then there were horrible forest fires in Oregon, and our smoke alarms all started going off, and the air wasn't breathable, and it started to feel quite apocalyptic then. But
Yeah.
I did do a fair amount of writing about these sort of modes, and I felt badly that my writing about Shakespeare seemed to have spurred a kind of like Shakespeare got a lot of writing done, so why didn't you? So I wrote a kind of spoof piece for the New Yorker called "What Shakespeare Actually Did During the Plague," in which I imagined what it would be like if you had to get up every day and try to write King Lear. And so I just put all my writing anxieties onto Shakespeare and sort of wrote a diary of every day him waking up, trying to write King Lear and not being able to do it, and then feeling increasingly bad about himself, which was sort of how I was feeling at the time too.
And then there was something about when you mentioned about Puerto Rico, and that how Lin-Manuel Miranda came there to help, I guess, help support the community, but there was a lot of negative feedback that this
Right.
was more of a promotion to get the show going, but he was really there to help build the community. When it comes to theaters promoting something during a type of pandemic, like what they were
Mhm.
doing with Tick Tick Boom at the time,
Mm.
what are some like do's and don'ts that you've learned from Miranda, or from any of the others that you were able to interview? What were like some do's and don'ts of when it comes to promoting that type of material during a specific disaster? Kind of like what Miranda had warned his audience prior to Basketcase premiering after 9/11.
That's right. Yeah, that's a nice connection to draw there. Well, I think he felt with Puerto Rico, and certainly those were the hardest moments in our interviews for him to discuss because he still felt wrenched by it. I think his intentions were always good. He only ever wanted to help the island where his parents came from. And when Hamilton was at its height, Puerto Rico was in this debt crisis that was really fueled by, decades of colonialism. And he wrote an editorial for the New York Times supporting a debt relief plan that the Obama administration had come up with that was, in essence, going to give control of Puerto Rico's economy to a federal oversight board. And he felt that that was the only viable solution at the time, the only solution that could get through Congress. And so he wrote in support of it. But it turned out that this solution ended up imposing really horrible austerity measures on Puerto Rico's economy and on its education system. And so basically, in order to sort of relieve the debt, this oversight board shut down lots of schools and put in huge budget cuts at the university. And because Lin-Manuel had supported the initial creation of the board, people who were upset about those cuts were then upset about him and used the occasion of him coming to Puerto Rico to protest the cuts, even though all of the money from Hamilton was going to the island. They weren't taking any profits from it. All of the money was supporting arts organizations and was being used to rebuild the university's theater after the hurricane. But because Lin-Manuel had supported Promesa, this federal control, he was the on the receiving end of a lot of criticism, and he still feels like, for him, the takeaway was he didn't know enough about what this solution was actually going to be before he weighed in support of it. And
Mhm.
so, and he felt like he made a mistake with it, and he acknowledged that he didn't want to support what it did, and he regretted having lent his name to fuel the initial policy. So I think his lesson would be, make sure you really understand what you're talking about before you
Right.
weigh in.
Yeah. After Tick Tick Boom had wrapped up, where it says here on 316, Julie, I guess, as Jonathan's sister, she says
Right.
that she was glad it didn't present a whitewashed version of Saint Johnny. Larson was often playful, affectionate, generous. He could also be obsessive, insecure, and self-absorbed, which is basically how it's portrayed. But I was surprised as I was reading further on how much flack the film received from other viewpoints, like Andrew Weisblum, and then Myron Kirstein, when it came to like editing, and then that it was annoying to do all that, and that it was not. I don't know. There was a lot of like, I guess it says here, Jonathan brushes off his loving girlfriend because he's obsessing over a song for his upcoming workshop, and he complains about people who sell out to his HIV positive best friend who's got an advertising job to pay for health insurance. He's asking what's his actual suffering. So I was just surprised that there was a lot of like negativity that
Hmm.
that people took away from the film, or that he was made out to be a type of saint-like person, but then they revealed another type of true side that other people who had never heard of him before were not totally accepting. What was your view on
Yeah. So
on Tick Tick Boom?
I love Tick Tick Boom. I was enraptured by this story of how a guy tries to make art in a world that's often hostile to it. And those comments that you were quoting were reactions to the first cut of the film when it was first screened for audiences before it was widely released. And at those
Okay.
initial screenings, a lot of people didn't sympathize with the story of a songwriter who just has to write one song to get his show produced. They thought, why is this guy brushing off his girlfriend and sort of whining about his life when he has people who are really suffering from HIV without health insurance and around him. And I thought, and so what I really loved, this is another instance of what we were talking about earlier, which is you have the initial creative impulse, and then you got to test it out and you got to edit it to make it better. So Lin-Manuel reshot and recut a lot of scenes in the film, and he added a scene of Jonathan Larson as a waiter in a diner with a trying to take out the garbage, and the garbage just bursts all over him and all over the floor. And the idea was like, let people see that Jonathan Larson is relatable. Like all of us, he has things that he doesn't want to do that he has to do in order to do the things that he wants to do. And this is about whether you can chase your dreams given those circumstances. And what I told Lynn was, I want to have scenes of you trying to take out the garbage. I want, in essence, I don't want you to be Saint Johnny in this book. I want to show your moments where you tried something and it failed, or when you felt insecure, or when you felt doubts too, because that is what is going to allow us to relate to somebody who achieves the highs that you are going to achieve later on. And so I was very grateful that he was willing to be vulnerable with me about those moments too.
There was a couple of things that I wanted to highlight last with all of the articles that you've done, because Miranda said that Sondheim was his number one mentor and that he actually collaborated with him. He would call him for advice, and that he died a week after the last conversation. And
Yeah.
I don't recall looking at the articles that you've done. Did you ever get a chance to interview Stephen Sondheim whilst he was alive?
We emailed on two occasions. So when I was writing about Oklahoma, I wrote to him, and then when I was writing about an article about the origins of West Side Story, I wrote to him. And both times I asked if he was up for meeting, and he said he was too ailing at that point to meet. But he very generously responded to my messages and answered my questions. And so I felt very lucky that I was at least able to correspond with him before he passed away.
And speaking of a mentor, who was a mentor for you when it came to your decision to become an English PhD professor and and theatrical infuser?
Oh,
That helped you learn
when
that.
I I remember when I sent a copy of this book to Shakespeare professor named James Shapiro, and he was the guy who first said to me, "You can write a book." And he, in fact, introduced me to his own agent, and he was the one who said to me also, it's like, you could write a book about Lin-Manuel Miranda. He could be the Shakespeare that whose story you tell. And so, and he read every chapter of the book as I wrote it, and he gave me amazing feedback on it. And when I sent him a copy of the book, I inscribed it to him and said, "You're my Sondheim."
Oh, that's cool. That's awesome. The last thing in the epilogue was something about warriors. This was also based on a game?
There is a video game version. It's based on a movie from the 70s about a gang from Coney Island in Brooklyn that is wrongly accused of killing a leader at a citywide truce, and then tries to get back home with every other gang trying to kill them. And it's a movie. It doesn't mean much to me, but it was Lin-Manuel's obsession when he was a kid, and he had the idea to turn it into a musical. And I got to say, having no affection for the movie at all, I love the musical album that Lin-Manuel wrote with Issa Davis, his collaborator. So you can stream it anywhere, Spotify or YouTube, and it's going to be his next stage show as well.
That's
So
what I was
check
going
out.
to ask you if that was his next project, was turning that Warriors thing into a musical. Because right now I think it's just the mixtape or
It's right.
the sound
Yeah,
album.
that'll be
Yeah,
the next stage show.
awesome. Well, Daniel, this has been a wonderful journey for me to get to talk to you today and to talk about this wonderful book and your incredible background on books that you have that have helped you along the way. Are there any future projects that you're working on at the moment?
Yeah, working on a documentary film actually about another wonderful playwright, Mary Catherine Nagel, who is a lawyer and enrolled citizen of the Western Band of the Cherokee Nation. And she is an advocate for indigenous rights and for trying to change the legal system in our country to allow tribes to have jurisdiction over their own communities and to try to combat the horrible epidemic of violence against missing and murdered Indigenous women. And she also writes plays to educate people about the history of our legal systems and the history of Indigenous rights. And when I started seeing her plays at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, Mannahatta, Sovereignty, Crossing the Neshoshe, Sliver of a Full Moon, they expanded my sense of our country's history and taught me a new way of thinking. And so I wrote a profile of her for the New Yorker, and it's being adapted into a documentary feature film that I'm a consulting producer on. And I'm really inspired by her work as a lawyer and as an advocate and as a writer. And I'm excited for more people to learn about her.
That is wonderful. I'm looking forward to seeing that. And anyway, wish your family well wishes and blessings for
Thank
me,
you.
and Mazel Tov
Thank
for
you.
allowing me this wonderful time. And thank you so much again. And I'll reach out to you once this episode is ready to air. But thank you so much. You
Becca,
made
thank you for your wonderful questions, and thank you for reading the book so attentively and perceptively. I'm really grateful to you.
awesome. Have a wonderful day and a great teaching year. Bye
Thank
bye.
you so much. Take care.